We're going to ask you 3 questions which we're going to ask you to vote on. And after each question, and we get the original results, we're then going to have a brief discussion about that, move on to the next question, and at the end we'll have an open forum when you can ask any of the panel, you can leave me out of it if you want, to respond to your particular question. Without further ado, what we'd like you to do is, with your voting pads at the ready, I'll ask Neil to put the first question up, and he has done. And so the first question is, in order to deliver recovery, does substance misuse treatment in the UK require no change, moderate change, or radical change? Okay. You can have the results from that. Not surprisingly, very few people think we are where we ought to be. Moderate change, a healthy minority think we should have a moderate change. 64% of you think there needs to be a radical change. So, given that we think that, as a group, that we think a radical change is necessary, does anybody have any observations to make?
I'm trying to pose the question, but I'm not sure I can. It's perhaps a supplementary question. Radical change, is it radical change for everything we do, or do we think there are sections of what we do that need radical change, and other sections or other parts of what we do need moderate change, and there are actually some parts that need no change? It's just, how do we break that down a bit more?
Okay, Mark, do you want to, have you got a comment to make on that?
Do I have to talk through this?
Yeah.
I would say it's a radical change because, we have harm reduction strategy that the last government brought out, and so in which case it employed a whole raft and a whole industry full of people that dispense methadone. Yeah. Now, if we're going towards a policy of abstinence-based recovery or just recovery model, that means you've got a skills deficit within the industry of people that call themselves specialists who actually aren't. And that just doesn't involve, if that change did come, then we have to really have a long, hard look at the whole industry about whether we're actually got the capacity to deliver that.
We're responding, right? I think it's a very important question. I don't know that I would subscribe to radical change as much as I'm in sympathy with the feeling about that, because I see the whole drug treatment industry and its policy here as well as the U.S. In an evolution. So I don't know, radical change implies revolution, you know what I mean? And so I really see evolution. The harm reduction was a very important step in the evolution of society in terms of funding and supporting some kind of treatment or supportive services or activities which would reduce harm to individuals and the society. I didn't like it when it first came because I had worries that needle exchange and so on, we'd have problems with that, and the message that it would send and so on. But the data are clear on it that harm reduction was effective in what it does in terms of reducing harm. The evolutionary step, however, requires that we don't get locked into something like harm reduction as the final solution. And I think that's what Mark was worried about, is that if you suddenly think now we've got it because we're now reducing harm or we've satisfied taxpayers in some way. The real step, in the way I've seen it, I have framed harm reduction, in my view, where I'm promoting, and you know where I'm coming from, the change I want to see is a recovery-oriented system, that whatever the collection of our service and treatment providers, as well as our police and others, they all should understand that we're really a system which is designed to promote or facilitate recovery, and that could be explicit, and in which harm reduction strategies are appropriate at a certain stage in recovery. So these can be appropriately integrated into a recovery-oriented integrated system. What we then do in harm reduction at that system, here's where the revisionist approach comes, how we would then revise harm reduction so that it becomes now a more potent ingredient in a recovery-oriented system. That's the training and planning effects that we have to talk about. There are ways to do that. So I'm going to give medicine to somebody. I'm not going to give medicine in a vacuum. They're going to hear, it's going to be medicine which is really designed to talk about how you promote recovery in that respect. So there's a real place for medically assisted recovery strategies in a new order of what I would call a recovery-oriented system. But that's a training and planning issue. I may say the words sound good, but it really is a training and planning issue. Does that help?
Yeah, because I thought it was a strange question, and I was jumping between 2 and 3, and it all depends what part we're talking about, what useful part of medication. How do we, when we do it well, we do it really well. When we do it badly, we do it really, really, really badly. So there's a whole series of, I think it is organisational and structure and how you put recovery as a key component of what workers think they're doing and what that means in respect to their current activity. How, is there a radical change there? Or actually, they're doing it. They just don't call it that yet. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think I said I wasn't going to have an opinion. I think I've been in drug treatment since 1991. And I think there's a saying that says if you hang around long enough, that everything will come back round and we'll be doing it again. And there is an element of truth in that. One of the things that is frustrating for providing, facilitating drug treatment is the inability of politicians to hold more than one idea in their head at any given time. So we continually throw the baby out with the bathwater, and so the things that we've learned move on to the next great idea, and we tend to leave some learning behind each time. And I really hope that as we move into a recovery agenda, we take the relevant learning with us into that new approach. So, okay, if we can move on to the next question, then Neil. On a scale of 1 to 9, 1 being definitely not, to 9 being absolutely, is the current system relevant to all the different ways in which people in the UK use substances? Vote now. And the answer, puzzlingly, is 4.48. So about 4.48 seems to be about half of you, just around half of you think that the system is relevant.
So as a group, we were saying, on a scale of 1 to 9, we'd say 4.48 is...
They've agreed?
Sorry?
Was that an agreement? Or
that was consensus from everybody. So just over half, basically.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very important score. I mean, for the moment, in at least your first look at this, that the system that now exists may be essentially capable of dealing with the varieties of users, substance users, and along the dimension of, let's say, severity of their disorder, to keep it simple, you know what I mean? So maybe, and the system should be doing that in the evolution of drug treatment system. It should have gotten to the point where it recognizes various subgroups of addicts in terms of their severity needs, and then presumably provided some kind of relevant interventions, both social and treatment, to deal with that severity. That's where it should be, but you're not even in agreement that it's even there for that. And so that's one distinction, and we need to look at that in terms of policy and what's actually going on out there in the field. What are all these different providers doing, and why are they doing it? But the second point, and this is part of the propaganda for me, which is why I wanted the microphone, that even if you said 9 on this, that is, you had a high agreement that we were really providing everything for everybody, the issue is not only are all the relevant services available for the relevant subgroups, but the question is, are they really integrated so that, in fact, they're not getting services which have them in a silo, which says this is what they get here, and in a sense, then we don't know how much we've actually promoted their recovery. We might have provided some services, even if we're doing that well, in terms of the particular goals of that agency or that provider, and yet not really looked at the large picture of recovery. The real challenge is not whether we have all the services available, but do we have them integrated under a framework that we all agree with? And I would call that the recovery stage framework, and that's the one I'm really promoting. So you got to look at not only do we have the right diversity of services based on a good paradigm of the diversity of the clients, but that in fact we have a good framework to tell us what we should be doing in each of those settings.
How can you provide services that are relevant to everybody, all communities, right, regardless of ethnicity, diversity, gender, sexuality, when there's not even enough services across the country that are uniform in itself? The end.
Okay. Simon, do you want to pick that one up?
I'm not
I'm not sure I know the answer to all of this, but the things I wrote down when I was looking at this question, and I think those dilemmas are almost impossible to answer. I think we have to think very carefully about doing for the best for the people that present themselves. But there are some issues for me, which is, in looking at this question, what are we doing about recreational use in this country, in the UK? How are we addressing that? What are we doing about alcohol, which I think is an issue we just don't touch on in this country. The growing issues around cocaine. And for me, which probably addresses, the principal one for me, which probably addresses the question there, is how much of what we do is so far downstream, and whether we should be doing something a bit further upstream that recognises some of the risks in terms of the diverse groups.
Just an interesting conversation that I had this morning with a group of recovery champions from Liverpool, who were talking about the huge amount of skunk use and alcohol use has changed the picture. And what does occur to me about it is that our services are constantly changing. It relates back to the previous question. We are chasing a moving target in terms of the way in which people use substances, especially young people. The demographics of who are using drugs at the moment is changing, and is also geographically different around the country. So we do have to ensure, I think you're absolutely right to raise the point, how do we, as an organisation, deliver in recovery or facilitate in recovery, how do we ensure that our services are flexible enough and responsive enough to changing demands? There's a question over there.
Well, I just was kind of quite interested in your definition of system, because no system, as was pointed out over there, can ever deliver everything. But if your system starts to include the recovery community, then you have got a great deal of diversity out there. You have got experience, wealth of experience of people of all different kinds of uses, all different genders, all different backgrounds. So I wonder how much you include engaging the recovery community in your plans.
David and I put these questions together, and I'm fairly certain that we mentioned the recovery community while we were talking about it. There you go. We did. I mean, we're talking about the whole system in the way in which we respond, and I think you're absolutely right. The recovery agenda is about the community that's involved in recovery. Do you want?
I think I do spend a lot of time working in prisons and working with children as well who are in like the secure estate, yeah, so from 11 years to 17, and it's that question is laughable. Do you know what I mean, when you go into those areas of a recent 13-year-old heroin addict kid with a very dysfunctional attachment to his prostitute sister, and they've got outside services coming here in telling him this is what cocaine looks like, this is what cannabis looks like. He knows more about drugs and the consequences than the person delivering the programme. Yeah? Piazro, which is one of the biggest drug treatment programmes in British prisons today, it's never been evaluated, and yet the government spends millions and millions of pounds on an educational class inside of prison. Yeah? I find that, you know, the question laughable. Do you know what I mean? When we're talking about who is in control of treatment, which I subscribe to the recovery framework and stuff, but where we have been with it, day programmes get better funding than residential programmes. You know, for every addict in this country, there is a fraction of a bed available to them to go into residential treatment. We're far, far away from getting anywhere near it.
Thank you. Some questions at the back. Sure.
Yeah, I'm Stacey Sykes. I'm from Riot. I'm a recovery champion. Going back to Mark's story earlier on, the key points what stuck out to me, the turning points in his life where he was most inspired, came from other addicts that were in recovery. And I can speak for myself and I can speak for James. Those were the moments for me. Those were the people that I respected and listened to because I could see that there was another life out there. I've taken drink, all different kinds of drugs, mainly because I didn't know there was anything else to do. I didn't know there was another life. So the seed was planted in me through another addict. And through the amount of recovery addicts that are here today, recovery champions that are here today, I do think it is the way forward to have more recovery champions actually working within all different areas of treatment for addiction.
Question at the back, just by this back door.
What I've been trying to point out in the workshops that we were doing this afternoon is the fantastic opportunity that Addaction and service users and people in recovery and Smart UK as a mutual aid organisation have got in front of them just now. You know, in Scotland we talk about the road to recovery. It's the government policy, you know, and that road to recovery, the very definition by the Scottish government is moving away from addiction, okay, but the vast majority of that is reintegration into society, you know. That's about partnership, and the great thing about this afternoon has been about partnership, it's been about relationships, community, you know. SMART as a mutual aid organisation and Addaction as a service provider, a treatment provider, can link in together to provide aftercare. Recovery is a continuum, you know. It goes on, and it has many different shades for all individuals at different times of their life or their recovery, yeah? If treatment providers are building blocks in recovery, then mutual aid can be the cement, the holds the building blocks, the different services together in terms of an individual through care. But can then also, mutual aid can also lead on to aftercare for services and for that individual, making it easier for the individual who's been through treatment to make the transition to managing their own recovery, to getting on with their own life, to reintegrating themselves into society. When I left treatment after 2 years, it was a gamble whether I was going to connect into sustained recovery in terms of getting involved with mutual aid. And I eventually did, through fear of going back to the life that I'd been leading before treatment. After all those months of investment and hard work put in by myself, by other experts, because I then found out I was an expert on myself, yeah? But it was a gamble whether I was going to move on as an individual into sustained recovery after all that time was spent.
Can I thank you for that? It's really good insight into mutual aid. I want to move on to the next question now, because I do want to leave a session at the end for a sort of open forum to ask questions of the panel. So I think we've got another vote coming up. So the next question now is a three-parter. What do you think the priorities for Addaction in meeting the recovery agenda? And you've got 4 choices there: family work more closely with groups and like intuitive recovery, smart recovery, wide-in, etc. Employ more recovery champions, or increase delivery of residential treatment. There you go. Each of those will be 1 to 9. So you're currently voting for A on a scale of 1 to 9. 1 being unimportant or not very important, 9 being a high priority. Moving on to B and C, and finally D. Okay.
Very good. I thought they did very well.
Thank you for that.
I'm surprised by the residential treatment question, to be honest. I thought that would be higher. In fact, I thought that would be the highest.
7 something, right? Out of 9?
6.67, which in fact is the second lowest.
But I think the range is quite close, so I think that's quite interesting. We are struggling to really make a distinction. I think we would struggle to say there's one that we should drop off that. I think it's quite clear. Did anybody on the panel want to make a comment on?
Could I just make one comment? I'm surprised on D, but on B, it says working more closely with groups, intuitive recovery, smart recovery, and wired in. Yeah, there's a couple of organisations called AA, NA, and CA. Yeah, which are free. Yeah, and they're peer led, and whenever I sort of do this sometimes, and you get into this bit of controversy around, why is something that's free yeah, why isn't the door completely flung open to it? Yeah? If it's free, and some people it's right for, it should be used. Yeah, and we have this debate in prison. The bureaucracy stops them getting into prison, and it's something that's free, and it's one of the most profound programmes on this planet as far as numbers being in recovery for. So I'd like to just add that on there.
Surely all four of those areas are equally important. They're all part of the same package. I've experienced all of them. I'm here as a recovery champion. I've done family work through Addaction. I work with groups. I've done residential treatment. I now go back and volunteer there to help. So I'm kind of service user provider, and a recovery champion. And I